Hi, this is Dee Marley, and I am thrilled to have Shakespearean actor, playwright, and author Ron Destro on the show today. How are you doing today, Ron?
Oh, I am great. It's such a pleasure to talk to you, Dee.
And we're so glad to have you on the History Bards podcast. And for our listeners who might not know, Ron Destro is a Kennedy Center award-winning playwright, was named a top 10 director by Time Out Magazine London, and is an actor and teacher who has staged over 100 plays and more than 40 Shakespeare productions in New York, London, Stratford-upon-Avon, Italy, and France. He is the founding director of the New York-based Oxford Shakespeare Company, which offers professional master classes and trains actors to present Shakespeare plays in London and Stratford-upon-Avon. In addition to teaching at several universities, he created an acting program for the Joffrey Ballet School in New York City and is currently teaching at the University of North Florida. He studied with several renowned actors such as F. Murray Abraham, Michael York, and his current novel, The Starre, the Moon, the Sunne, is narrated by his longtime friend and actor, Sir Derek Jacobi. Again, thank you so much for being on the show. And to get started, we've given our audience a preview of who you are, but we'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about you and your journey as an actor, playwright, and author, all leading up to this new release.
Well, as you say, I'm most of my writing has been as a playwright, and so this is my first novel. And someone asked me last night. I did a book talk in Sarasota, and they asked why I chose to do it as a novel rather than a nonfiction book.
Right.
And the reason is because there are so many good books about the Shakespeare biography and the Shakespeare authorship question, who was he, that I felt what I wanted to do was, as I do in my plays, I want to tell a narrative, a story. And so rather than give a dry polemic trying to prove that Shakespeare was such and such, I thought the best way to interest people would be to write a murder mystery, an Elizabethan murder mystery, the solving of which just happens to reveal who Shakespeare was. But that's not the focus of the book. I really tried to tell a good story that was fun, that had a lot of twists and turns, that was humorous, and you just happen to learn about the Shakespeare pseudonym. And I think I first thought of this idea after seeing Shakespeare in Love, which it's a terrific movie, but it's not terrific because it's about Shakespeare. It's terrific because it's just a great romantic comedy.
Yes.
And so that's primarily at telling that story and telling a good story. So that's why I've written this like I have. And I'm very happy with the results.
Yeah, and you should be. And again, we had the privilege of reviewing your novel and at HFC, and which, by the way, to all our listeners, won 5 stars in the highly recommended Award of Excellence, and it's very well deserved. And I completely understand what you're saying about telling a good story. I had somebody tell me that one time. I actually got to meet Sir Derek Jacobi back, during the debates at the Globe Theater, and I had somebody ask me about that, and I was like, well, it does, you have to think about it in that sense, that if you're telling a good story, even though it may not be proven, we can't prove it, but it does make a good story. So that's exactly how we felt about your book. And I have to say, your wit, I just admired that so much, because it just kind of paralleled with how Shakespeare, or whoever wrote it, had the wit in the plays, and I really admired that.
Oh, that's great. Well, it's funny because I tend to play the Shakespeare clowns. Those are my favorite roles.
Okay.
Whether it's Jaques or Feste or the Gravedigger in Hamlet.
Yes.
And so I understand that Shakespeare's sense of humor, but I don't want to scare people because, and this is always the question with historical fiction is the language difficult to understand? A lot of people have asked me, will I be able to, I'm not a big Shakespeare person, so will I be able to understand it? And I assure them that I wrote it with that in mind, so that I wanted it to sound authentic. However, I wanted people to understand it, modern readers to understand it. So what I tell people is just go to Amazon and click on the book, and you can read the first few chapters there. So you can get a sense of how easy it is to understand. And then if you like it, don't buy it on Amazon. Go to my website, and I'll send you a signed copy.
Yes, absolutely. That is the best way. Yes, please get a signed copy from him. That would be the absolute best way, instead of getting Amazon involved.
There you go. And I was thinking of Derek Jacobi's humor. I've known Derek since the 80s, on and off. And he's just I think he's the greatest living Shakespearean actor. So I had him in mind when I created the narrator of Arthur Taverner, who's this kind of portly, drunken poet, and likes to go off on tangents and things. And he has just a great way of looking at life. And so I had Derek in mind when I wrote it. And so I was so happy that he liked the book. And then I asked him if he would narrate it. And so that was a thrill for me.
Well, I'm sure that was a thrill, because again, who better to get to narrate that than him?
Yes,
absolutely. One of my favorite movies is Anonymous, so I really love that.
Oh, great!
So, which kind of leads into, and this kind of goes into a little bit about the authorship, because about the research that you did, and about what led you to writing about the Earl of Oxford as a candidate.
Well, about 25 years ago, I was studying at Columbia University with a woman named Kristen Linkletter. And Kristen is one of the great Shakespearean voice teachers. And she wrote a book called Freeing Shakespeare's Voice. One of the textbooks that a lot of actors read in college is called Freeing the Natural Voice, which she wrote, and it's a general voice book. But she wrote one specifically for how to speak Shakespeare. And so I read that book in preparation for my summer working with her. And in the book, she's the one that kind of turned me on to the authorship. She said at the end of the book, I can't in good conscience write a book about Shakespeare without admitting I believe he was the Earl of Oxford. And I'd always known there was a question about who was Shakespeare, because we know so little about him, but what we do know seems to indicate that the man named William Shakespeare from Stratford-upon-Avon could not have been the writer. We know that from, there are many reasons. So the question then is, well, if it was a pen name, because the Elizabethan age was an age full of pen names and anonymous writings, and or people used allonyms, which means you took the name of a real person and added it to your work, so someone else could claim your work. And so the question was, well, was it Oxford or Bacon or Marlowe? There are all these wonderful candidates. And so who was it? And why and how was this put into practice? So that today we don't know. And so I wanted to write the story, again, not trying to, I received some great advice from a mentor of mine, a wonderful writer named Malcolm Mackay, who said, make sure when you write the book that you're not trying to prove who Shakespeare was.
Exactly.
But you've got to tell a great mystery. That's it. So anything extraneous that maybe helps the argument but doesn't further the story, forget about it. And I took his words very seriously. So there was a lot I didn't put in the book, because again, I wanted to just tell that story from Arthur's point of view. And what happened. A printer is executed by King James. King James is put into a panic, and people are kidnapped. An actor is taken from his father. What is going on? What caused all this? And so my protagonists, Nicholas and Valentina and Arthur, are set on a course to try to discover. They go to Stratford-upon-Avon. They try to find clues about Shakespeare, because they know, Nicholas knows that the identity of Shakespeare was what his printer father was working on when he was executed. So why did King James fear
Right.
a pamphlet about Shakespeare coming out. What was in that pamphlet? And so that's what sets them about trying to uncover clues. And as they uncover clues, more and more people are interested in stopping them from revealing anything.
Yeah, it's remarkable. and then there's some, we won't give them away because we don't want to give away any spoilers, but there's also some twists even about the main characters and who they are. Yeah,
that's right.
Absolutely.
Well, a good friend of mine that I studied with in London, Keith Cole, said a good mystery doesn't reveal who done it or what the secret is until the last page, and preferably the last paragraph, and preferably the last line. So I also took that advice to heart. So yes, there are a lot of things revealed throughout the story, and you think it's over, and then suddenly at the very end, the last page, you learn a big one.
A big one. That's for sure. That's for sure.
That you probably didn't see coming. So
no, I didn't. I absolutely didn't.
Good. I'm not sure I did.
And that's the way characters happen, isn't it? It's like as you're writing, it's just sometimes it comes out and you're like, wait a minute, where did that come from?
It's funny because I almost felt like I was just an instrument of a higher power, and this was all coming out because it was years and years of, I know this period, and I know Shakespeare, and I know the plays so well. I've directed 40 or 50 Shakespeare productions and been in many of them as an actor, and so I'm so involved in the world of Shakespeare,
right?
That
of course,
it just sort of all came.
Right. Do you have a favorite one that you've acted in?
Well, I think I love playing the sort of melancholy fool Jaques in As You Like It, because he's a wise fool. He's been through a lot, and he has some very sage advice. He's the one that gives the speech, "All the world's a stage."
Yes, of course.
So I love him. So that might be the favorite part.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, if anybody's like, we would love to know, maybe in the description, or maybe you can give us some links or whatever, if you're ever in any place that any of us can go to. We would love to see you.
Terrific.
We'd love to see you in those. Well, so back to the book. So can you give us a little insight about the kind of research that you did for this?
Oh, sure. Yes. Well, after studying with Kristen 25 years ago, I asked her about the authorship, and she said, well, if you're interested, look at this book, look at that book, and so forth. So that started me on my quest. And I did nothing. I sort of retired from the world for about 5 years and did nothing but stay in the woods in Connecticut with ducks and the deer and their authorship books. And I quickly came to the conclusion very early that Mark Twain and Walt Whitman and Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry James and Anne Rice and David McCullum and all these people were absolutely right that it could not be that Stratford fellow. And so I chose my candidate based on the fact that I think whoever Shakespeare was, he was very concerned with putting the life of my guy on stage at all of his plays and poems. And so and so I joined the different authorship societies and went to conferences and so forth. And I still do it. I just got back last week from London, where I was with Derek Jacobi and Mark Rylance at the De Vere Society in Shakespeare Authorship Trust. And I'll be going to New Orleans in a couple of weeks to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship Conference. So I get a lot of information from scholarly papers written by all of these. I tell people I stand on the shoulders of giants. So I've read all these authorship books and seen all the films about it. And so that's that. And then I've looked at primary source documents. You have to look, in order to know about Shakespeare, you have to look at the Revels records and how early the plays were produced at court, and Thomas Nash's document saying that there was a Hamlet way early
Way early.
on, before Will Shakespeare was old enough to write.
Yes.
And not that he ever could write, probably, because he couldn't sign his name very well.
Exactly.
So you look at all these primary source documents, including the Stratford man's will, which gives no indication he owned books or furniture to keep books. He owned no quills and papers, although he tells us he had pots and pans and everything else, but there's no mention of books. Also, no mention of his manuscripts, half of which were unpublished at the time of his death. Yes. So I did all that research. And then when I sat down to write the novel, I wanted to create this sort of murder mystery of a printer who's going to reveal everything. And King James would certainly not want the truth out, I think, because of the secrets revealed, especially in the sonnets. But, and what was interesting was, as I was researching, it was during the pandemic, and one of my main characters dies of the plague. And so we were going through our own plague, and I started researching the plague in London in those days. And so I used some of that information in my novel. And I also discovered what I thought was an interesting story. To me, the reason we don't really know who Shakespeare was, I think it's a story about fathers and sons. Yes. I think there were sacrifices to be made. And certainly in my story, the writer sacrifices for his son. And so I found something very interesting in researching the Elizabethan period, that Queen Elizabeth had the authority to take boys off the street and conscribe them into the army and navy and so forth. Right. But she also could do that if she wanted to put them in her choir, and she could just take anybody she wanted, and they were in her choir. And so I discovered a true story of that happening to a boy, and his father was so upset that he sued the crown to get his boy back. And so that story is part of my book as well.
Yeah. That's really fascinating. It's always amazing when you can find those little tidbits of research and to be able, because that's one of the things I love about historical fiction, is that it's not only entertains, but it teaches about history and the things. And that's one of the things I love about it. Is there something that you found that was really difficult about writing this book?
Well, probably editing it, to be honest.
Yes.
Because I had so much. I mean, the first version of the novel was 124,000 words. Okay. And most agents would not look at it.
Right.
And certainly publishers wouldn't look at any book over 100,000 for a first novel. Right. So, I knew I had to get it between 80 and 100. And so I found a wonderful agent, Fiona Smith, and who's in Australia, and Fiona worked with me on ideas for editing. So I was able to get it down. And also, I knew that Derek Jacobi had a limited time to do the audiobook, and I didn't want to do I wanted an unabridged audiobook. Right. I didn't want it cut. Right. So that was part of my motivation to get it down to about 80. It's 81,000 words. Okay. Yeah. And so that was the hardest part, to say, oh, I really love this scene.
Yeah,
but
that happens.
You have to ask yourself, it's interesting, but does it further the plot? And if it doesn't, you could take it out. Yeah. And so I think it's a nice trim size now.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's well worth, every single word's well worth the read.
Oh, thank you.
You're very welcome. Do you have a favorite line or passage from your own book that you'd like to share?
Oh, well, there's something that stuck with me was one of the characters is actually he's dying from the plague, and in his last moments, he's thinking about his son, who's about I think he's 11 years old. Mm-hmm. And he's thinking about his son's future, and if he will have a future of success, or if he will have a tragic future. And the narrator says, the heartache he knew was in the never knowing. And so I just like that phrase sort of popped in my mind.
Yeah.
And as a father, I thought of that. So that, but there's a lot of humor in the book as well.
Yes, there is. There is. But that is a very profound statement. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, thank you.
Was there any advice that you were given along your way in this writing journey that you could maybe share with other aspiring historical fiction authors?
Well, the advice came from several people, and it's true for actors as it is with writers, which is just you're telling a story. So I remember getting this advice from John Barton at the Royal Shakespeare Company when I was working on a monologue that he was helping me with, and he just said, you come in and you're telling the story. You're telling everyone what you just saw. So remember, tell them the story. And that's really true of writing, that you need to tell the story. And if there are things that are not necessary, you don't need to tell that. But you're telling a story, you want to be clear about it. And of course, I always tell writers, just finish it. Get something finished.
Yes. Yeah.
And then
get it down on the
back.
page.
Yeah, right. You've got to. It's that discipline. And it doesn't take a lot. I mean, if you do an hour a day, I think someone said, one of Emile Zola's friends said, you've written all these books, but you're always with us at the bar. You're always with us at lunch. And when do you write? And he said, in the morning, I write for 1 hour. I write one page. And at the end of the year, I have a book, 300 some pages.
Yeah.
So,
that's really good advice. That's really good advice. Yeah.
It is. But of course, then you get excited about what you're writing. And so you'll stay there for a couple hours writing. And so it gets easier. Then you want to go back later in the day and do some more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know I kind of wanted to talk about how this has impacted your life, because I know for myself, I'm a baby whenever it comes to the authorship debate about, because I had learned about this, 20 years ago.
Sure.
And then going to the debate in 2007 in London. So my focus was on Marlowe with my book.
Right. Yes.
But I have to say, this book has impacted me the same way that the movie Anonymous did. So my leaning has started going more towards the Earl of Oxford.
You're starting to veer.
I'm starting to veer.
Okay.
Yes, I am. That's great. So that's how it's impacted me. But I want to know how this book has impacted your life.
Well, I always say Kristen Linkletter is the lady who ruined my life because, she started me on this obsession.
Yeah.
And this is the subject that, usually my friends say, don't get him started on. But it impacted my understanding of the greatest plays and poetry in the world. Yes. Because once, I always ask actors like Derek Jacobi, Michael York. I've asked Jeremy Irons this question, that it does knowing who the author was, that it was a different author than everybody else thinks. Does that affect the way you perform the plays? And they all say, no, it doesn't, because you're playing that character in that situation on stage. Right. However, there is a deeper resonance, when you know that he's writing about true things that happened to him. That, a lot of Hamlet, I think Hamlet is the most amazing play because it's so autobiographical.
Yes.
And a lot of people, if you have the wrong Shakespeare, then you don't understand that.
Exactly.
So there's a deeper resonance when you know that these things happened to this man. Yeah. And that in the sonnets, he is deeply concerned with his bad reputation, his bad name. And he says, my name will be buried where my body is. So how could that be? I once gone to all the world must die. How could his name be buried if it says William Shakespeare, he knew the sonnets would live on forever. He talks about them being immortal. but he says my name will be buried. So he's telling us that William Shakespeare is not my name, but no one will know my name. And I think he felt badly about that. Although it was a disgrace for noblemen to add their names to their works. Even Sir Philip Sidney didn't add his name, and it was only after he died that people knew, oh, Sidney wrote this, and he was only a knight. But a lot of lords wrote, and a lot of them said, I don't want my name attached to my work, even posthumously. So it was a tricky thing in those days, and Queen Elizabeth reigned with an iron fist. So you had to be careful what you wrote, because you could get your hand chopped off or your head chopped off. So how someone got away with writing Hamlet, which ridicules Lord Burleigh, the most powerful man in England, or Richard III, which ridicules his son. Then whoever Shakespeare was, he was an allowed fool. But it changed my life in that for a while I had to sort of be in the closet about all this, because I teach at universities sometimes, currently at the University of North Florida. And a lot of times at university, if you're young and starting out, you can't tell them that you don't believe Shakespeare was Shakespeare. It's like,
no,
it's like telling them there's no God. I mean, it's against the religion. So they will consider you loony, crazy. So we're just crazy heretics.
Yes, we are. I guess
but I don't care. I'll speak the truth. But not everybody can. So that's kind of sad. As a matter of fact, Elizabeth Winkler has this new book out called Shakespeare Was a Woman and Other Heresies, which is a nonfiction book. But it's about the backlash she received by writing an article in a magazine. And suddenly everyone was tearing her apart. And she wasn't even advocating the theory. She was just talking about the fact that some people believe this theory. And so she decided to write a book about the backlash.
Yeah. And so it really is amazing, because you have people, it's like the minute that you say that, they take a stance, oh my goodness, you're not a Shakespearean. And again, but there's so many, it's like you said earlier about all of the ones that throughout history who have believed this. People like Mark Twain and Henry James.
Whitman, Emerson, Henry James wrote The Birthplace, a short story, just exactly about this. Well, what's interesting though too is that a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, the doubting only happened. It all started in the 1850s with Delia Bacon, and they ridicule her and so forth." Well, actually, in my lectures, I point out quotations that were printed in books from as early as 1589, where people were very subtly suggesting that Shakespeare was not Shakespeare. I mean, he was called one poet called him our English Terence, William Shakespeare, our English Terence. Well, the Renaissance belief was that Terence was not a real writer, but he was a front man for the aristocrat Scipio. So why would you call him Terence?
Exactly.
And other people said he wrote with a borrowed name. And so this is in the day they were writing this. So everybody, the people in the know knew. I think it was a sort of an open secret at court. Everybody knew who was writing these plays, but you just couldn't attach your name to them.
Of course. Yeah. Well, that is so fascinating. It's something that is, with the authorship debate continuing on and on and on, it's something that I know people can talk about for a really long time. I could sit and talk to you about it for hours.
We will someday.
Yes, absolutely. So let me ask you this. Do you have a favorite saying that you personally live by? It kind of tells the reader or the listeners a little bit about you.
Well, I was thinking about that because I've seen your podcast.
Okay.
And I know that's a good question. I mean, I first thought this too shall pass, because that is something I think, when we're going through tough times, you think this too shall pass. But I remember the old song, we may never pass this way again. So enjoy life now, do what you want to do now. And I recently watched, a friend of mine, Andy Tennant, directed a wonderful film recently called The Secret, Dare to Dream. And the whole idea of that film is, if you think something good is going to happen in your life, it will happen. And, maybe not literally, but you will, with a positive attitude, you'll have a happier life.
Yes. And that's very, very true.
And so I do believe that.
Oh, that's great. That's a great thing to live by, to have that kind of positive attitude.
That's right.
Well, can you tell our listeners what you have coming up? Do you have any special events or book signings that we need to know about that we can post on our description?
Oh, well, I'm going to be signing in Jacksonville, New Orleans, the Villages, Daytona Beach, Chautauqua Institution. So a lot. I've got a lot of them.
A lot.
So those are all in the works.
Okay. And I'm sure that the listeners can go to your website and learn all about those, about when they might could catch up with you and get a book signed.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll put it. It's rondestro.com. So that's easy. That's easy. Sure.
We'll definitely do that. Well, we thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, it's an honor to talk to you finally, Dee.
Yeah, absolutely. And as always, for more information on Ron's books, you can click in the link in the description, or again, go to his website at rondestro.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Thank you so much to our listeners and viewers. This is Dee Marley at the History Bards podcast. Keep making history and keep listening.